They called me the sweet elderly owner in the Airbnb ad they posted for my own house behind my back. They thought I wouldn't notice. They forgot that this sweet elderly owner sings soprano in the church choir and that we needed a new place to practice. They were about to get a lesson in joyful, noisy, righteous revenge. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know, I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of elder abuse. Now let me tell you what really happened. My name is Florence Covington, but everyone who has known me for more than 5 minutes has called me Flo. At 71, my life had settled into a rhythm as comfortable and familiar as my favorite armchair. My small bungalow on a quiet tree-lined street was my sanctuary, a place I had filled with 40 years of memories, first with my beloved husband Thomas and now with his cherished memory. Thomas had been a man who believed in foundations, in a solid roof over your head, in a community you could count on, in a love that was true. He'd worked his entire life at the post office to ensure our home was paid off, a fortress of security for me in my twilight years. My days were peaceful, measured by my weekly choir practice at the New Hope Baptist Church, the Sunday services with Reverend Knight, and the almost daily visits from my daughter, Alicia. Alicia, my only child, was a whirlwind. At 44, she possessed a modern energy that often left me feeling a little breathless. She and her husband, Marcus, lived just a few towns over, but their visits were frequent, usually punctuated by long, weary sighs about their finances. "Oh, Mama, you wouldn't believe the cost of everything these days," Alicia would lament, scrolling through pictures of lavish vacations on her gleaming smartphone. "We're just broke. Utterly broke." Marcus, a man of 46 who always seemed to be agreeing with his wife, would just nod sagely, his eyes scanning my modest but well-kept living room with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. I loved my daughter, of course I did. But her definition of broke seemed to differ greatly from my own. It seemed to include expensive salon appointments, new gadgets for their home, and weekends away they'd later post about online with captions about being blessed. I never said a word, just offered them another slice of my pound cake and a listening ear. A mother's love is a patient thing. It was on one of these visits about 3 months ago that Alicia came to me with a special request. "Mama," she began, her voice all sweetness and light, "you know how you have your church group every Wednesday afternoon? Well, the new decorator for our building lobby needs to come by on Wednesday to measure our windows for new blinds, and I absolutely have to be there. Could I possibly borrow your spare key just to let him in and out while you're gone? It would be a lifesaver." It seemed a reasonable enough request. My little bungalow was closer to her work than her own home, a convenient place for her to wait. "Of course, dear," I'd said, retrieving the key from the small ceramic dish by the door where it had sat untouched for years. "Just be sure to put it back." "Oh, I will, Mama. You're the best," she chirped, giving me a quick perfumed hug before hurrying off. The first time she returned the key as promised. The second time, a few weeks later for another delivery, she said she'd leave it on the counter, but in her rush she must have forgotten. "Oh, Mama, I'm so sorry. I'll bring it next time," she'd said over the phone. But she never did. And I, in my trusting, non-confrontational way, didn't press the issue. It was my daughter after all. That's when the small, unsettling things began to happen. It was nothing I could put my finger on at first. Just a faint, lingering sense of wrongness, like a musical note played slightly out of tune. I'd come home from my grocery shopping and find a teacup in the sink that I didn't remember using. The thermostat, which I kept religiously at a sensible 70 degrees, would be turned up to a stuffy 75. Once I found a small, unfamiliar indentation on the guest room pillow, as if someone had been resting there for a short while. I chalked it up to age. "Flo, you're getting forgetful," I chid myself with a sad little smile. It was so easy to believe. At 71, memory can be a fickle friend. I started leaving little notes for myself, trying to track my own movements, my own habits, feeling a growing sense of unease, a feeling that I was becoming a ghost in my own home. The most jarring incident happened on a Saturday. I always spent Saturdays volunteering at the church library. I returned home in the late afternoon to find the distinct, cloying scent of a perfume I despised. A trendy, expensive scent that Alicia sometimes wore. It was strongest in my bedroom. I looked around, my heart beginning to pound. Everything was neat just as I had left it. But the window, which I always kept locked, was cracked open an inch. And the small antique silver box on my dresser, the one that held my late husband's cufflinks, seemed to be shifted just a fraction to the left. It was a violation. A subtle, almost imperceptible invasion, but an invasion nonetheless. I called Alicia immediately. "Alicia, honey," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "Were you by the house today?" "Me? No, Mama, of course not," she'd replied, her voice a little too quick, a little too defensive. "Marcus and I have been running errands all day on the other side of town." "Why?" "It's just, the house smells of your perfume," I said, my voice small. A short, brittle laugh came down the line. "Oh, Mama, you're imagining things. It's probably just the new air freshener I bought you last week. You're getting so worked up over nothing. Imagining things." That was her refrain. But I wasn't imagining it. The feeling of another presence in my home, of my sanctuary being used by unseen others, was growing stronger, more undeniable every day. I felt a cold knot of dread tighten in my stomach. Something was happening in my house behind my back. And I had a terrible sinking feeling that the spare key I had so trustingly handed over to my daughter was the key to unlocking this deeply unsettling mystery. The feeling of being a stranger in my own home intensified over the next 2 weeks. It was a creeping, insidious sensation, a slow poison to my peace of mind. I'd find a single long blonde hair, not my silver white, on the guest bathroom floor. A half-empty bottle of expensive sparkling water would be in my recycling bin when I only ever drank tap. I started to feel like the character in that old black and white movie, the one whose husband was trying to drive her mad by subtly changing her environment. Was I going crazy? Was this what it felt like to have your mind finally, gently fray at the edges? The breaking point, the moment that tore through the fog of my self-doubt, came on a Monday morning. Mrs. Gable, my sweet, gossipy neighbor from across the street, was retrieving her mail at the same time as me. "Morning, Flo," she chirped, her voice bright. You've been a busy bee lately. So much company. I saw that lovely young couple with the matching suitcases leaving early this morning. Looked like they were heading to the airport. Niece and nephew of yours." I stared at her, my hand frozen on the handle of my mailbox. A young couple. Suitcases. Leaving my house. "No, Brenda," I said slowly, my mind racing to find a plausible explanation that wasn't the terrifying one forming in my heart. "Just friends of Alicia's. They were picking something up for her." The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. Mrs. Gable gave me a slightly puzzled look but thankfully didn't press the issue. I retreated into my house, my heart hammering against my ribs. It wasn't my imagination. Strangers. Strangers had been in my home, had likely slept in my guest bed, had used my towels, had left with their suitcases as if checking out of a hotel. A hotel. The thought struck me with a sudden, sickening clarity. My granddaughter, Maya, had visited a few months back before she left for college. She'd been showing me how to look up vacation spots on her tablet, using a website with a funny name. "See, Grandma," she'd said, tapping the screen. "Airbnb. You can rent whole houses instead of just a hotel room." With trembling fingers, I retrieved my own old tablet from the desk drawer. It was slow, a bit outdated, but it connected to the internet. I typed the strange name into the search bar. Airbnb. The website bloomed onto the screen, a colorful mosaic of exotic destinations. I found the search box and, with a sense of profound dread, typed in my own city, my own neighborhood. I scrolled through listings of modern condos and trendy loft apartments. Nothing. My heart gave a small flutter of relief. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe there was another explanation. But I kept scrolling, refining the map, zooming in closer and closer to my own quiet street. And then I saw it. My breath caught in my throat. It was my house. My little bungalow. There it was, the photo taken from across the street, my prize-winning roses blooming proudly in the foreground. The title of the listing was, "Charming Vintage Getaway, Quiet and Cozy." The host's name, accompanied by a professionally smiling photo of my daughter, was Alicia. I clicked on the listing, a wave of nausea washing over me. The photos. They had taken photos of my life and put it on display for the world. My living room with Arthur's armchair and the Afghan I'd knitted. My kitchen with its cheerful yellow curtains. And then the ultimate violation, my own bedroom. My bed, with its familiar quilt, was neatly turned down, advertised as the master suite. They had even photographed the small collection of porcelain birds on my dresser, calling them charming retro decor. I scrolled down to the description, my hands shaking so badly I could barely control the tablet. Alicia's words, so full of cheerful corporate-sounding lies, leaped off the page. Enjoy a peaceful retreat in this beautifully maintained vintage home. Perfect for a quiet weekend getaway. The owner, a sweet elderly woman, is very private and is often out visiting family on weekends, so you'll likely have the place all to yourself. A sweet elderly woman, often out visiting family. The condescension, the utter disregard for my existence was breathtaking. I wasn't the owner. I was a feature, a quaint, harmless ghost who wouldn't be underfoot. The strange perfume, the moved teacups, the extra warmth in the house. It all made a sickening kind of sense now. My home, my sanctuary, had been turned into a secret, illicit hotel. My daughter, my own flesh and blood, was not just disrespecting me. She was selling my life out from under me one weekend at a time to strangers. And keeping every single penny. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, searing wave that threatened to consume me. To think of strangers sleeping in my bed, using my things all while I was at choir practice or volunteering at the library, believing my home was my safe, private space. It was a desecration. And Alicia, and Marcus, her silent, complicit husband, they had done this. They had used my trust, my love, my spare key as tools for their greedy little side hustle. They had reduced me to a footnote in my own life story, a quiet old woman to be managed and monetized. I sat there for a long time, staring at the smiling face of host Alicia on the screen. The initial shock, the deep, wounding heartbreak began to recede, replaced by something else, something I hadn't felt with such intensity in a very long time. It was a cold, quiet, righteous fury. They thought I was a sweet elderly woman who was off and out. They thought I was a harmless prop in their money-making scheme. They were about to learn that this quiet old woman had a backbone of steel. They had turned my home into a business. It was time to show them how a real business was run. For 2 days I did nothing. I moved through my violated home in a state of quiet, simmering rage. Every familiar object now seemed tainted, viewed by the eyes of strangers. Had they sat in this chair? Eaten from this plate? Slept on this pillow? The feeling of invasion was a constant, itchy presence under my skin. I didn't call Alicia. What would I say? Screaming and crying would only give her the satisfaction of seeing me hysterical, confirming her narrative of me as an emotional, unstable old woman. A direct accusation would be met with a barrage of gaslighting and lies. No. My response had to be as calculated and as devastating as their own quiet betrayal. My mind, trained by years of keeping meticulous household accounts and organizing church fundraisers, began to work. They were using a system, a platform to exploit me. What if I could use that same system to turn the tables on them? The idea, when it first came to me, was so audacious it made me smile for the first time in weeks. A sharp, humorless smile. My opportunity to find a co-conspirator came on Wednesday afternoon at choir practice. The New Hope Baptist Church Choir was my family, my community. We were a rambunctious, joyful group of 30 souls, our voices raised in harmony every week. After we'd finished practicing a particularly rousing rendition of His Eye is on the Sparrow, I approached our choir director, Reverend Michael Knight. Reverend Knight, or Michael as he insisted I call him, was more than just our pastor. He was an old, dear friend. At 55, he had a kind, intelligent face, a booming laugh that could shake the rafters, and a keen sense of justice that often found its way into his powerful sermons. Michael, I began, my voice low as the other choir members began to pack away their sheet music. I have a rather delicate problem. I need your advice. And perhaps, I added, a small mischievous glint in my eye, your help. We sat in his small book-lined office, the scent of old paper and peppermint tea a comforting familiarity. I laid out the entire sordid story. The spare key. The strange occurrences. The neighbor's comment. And finally, the horrifying discovery of my own home listed on Airbnb, complete with a condescending description of me as the sweet elderly owner who was off and out. I showed him the listing on my tablet. He scrolled through the pictures of my home, his kind face hardening into a mask of pure indignation. He read the description, his lips tightening into a thin, angry line. When he looked up, his eyes were blazing. Florence Covington, he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. That daughter of yours has committed a profound act of disrespect. Not just to you but to the memory of Thomas and to the very idea of family. This is an abomination." He shook his head in disbelief. "To sell your sanctuary, your privacy, out from under you for a few miserable dollars. And to describe you like some quaint, negligible feature of the property. I am appalled." "I am more than appalled, Michael," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I am angry, and I have a plan. But I need your help to execute it." He leaned forward, his full attention on me. "Flo," he said, "after what they've done, you name it. The choir, the whole church will stand with you. What do you need?" A slow, deliberate smile spread across my face. "I need," I said, "a very large, very enthusiastic group of travelers. For a quiet spiritual retreat." I outlined my idea. His initial look of confusion quickly morphed into one of dawning comprehension, and then into a magnificent booming laugh that rattled the teacups on his desk. "Flo. Oh, Flo, that is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. It's inspired. It's righteous. It's a form of musical, karmic justice." He slapped his knee in delight. "Count us in. The New Hope Gospel Choir is at your service." The plan was simple, yet I hoped devastatingly effective. We would use the church's resources to book my house through Alicia's Airbnb listing, every single available weekend for the foreseeable future. We would create an anonymous profile, pay with a prepaid credit card to make it untraceable to me, and fill my home not with quiet, high-paying tourists, but with the joyful, roof-raising, wall-shaking sound of 30 gospel singers in full-throated rehearsal. "Alicia and Marcus will get the notification that their weekends are booked solid," Michael chuckled, already caught up in the delicious subterfuge. "They'll be counting their money, celebrating their genius side hustle. They'll have no idea they've just booked their own comeuppance." "They wanted my home to be a quiet vintage getaway," I said, a sharp, satisfying edge to my voice. "We'll give them a getaway, all right. But it will be anything but quiet." We spent the next hour working out the logistics, a general and his trusted lieutenant planning a strategic counteroffensive. Michael would help me set up the anonymous profile. He'd collect a small, anonymous cash donation from the choir members to fund the prepaid card. We'd coordinate the arrivals and departures. Walking out of the church that afternoon, I felt a lightness in my step I hadn't felt in months. The humiliation, the shame, the feeling of being a powerless victim, it was all still there, a dull ache in my heart. But now it was accompanied by a new, exhilarating feeling, the thrill of the fight. They had underestimated me. They had dismissed me. They had tried to turn my life into a commodity. They were about to find out that this quiet, elderly woman had a choir of angels at her back, and they were all about to sing a song of righteous, glorious revenge. The next few days were a quiet flurry of clandestine activity, a silent conspiracy hatched between myself and my dear friend Reverend Michael Knight. It felt in a strange way like being young again, like planning a secret that held a thrilling, world-altering potential. My grief and humiliation, which had been a heavy, suffocating cloak, now felt like fuel, propelling me forward with a new and unfamiliar sense of purpose. Our first step was to secure the weapon, the prepaid credit card. It felt cloak and dagger me, a 71-year-old woman, walking into a drugstore and purchasing a gift card with a roll of cash I'd taken from my housekeeping budget. The young man at the counter had given me a slightly puzzled look, but I just smiled my most benign, sweet, elderly woman smile, the very one my daughter's Airbnb profile had so condescendingly described. The irony was not lost on me. That evening, Michael came over to my house after his own church duties were done. We sat at my kitchen table, my old, slow tablet between us, and began to build our digital Trojan horse. "All right, Flo," he said, his eyes twinkling with a mischievous light that seemed very unpastor-like. "Let's create our travelers." We decided on a suitably innocuous profile name, New Hope Traveler, with a generic profile picture of a sun rising over a mountain. We filled out the details with vague, untraceable information. For the About Me section, Michael, with a flourish, typed, "A quiet, contemplative group seeking peaceful retreats for spiritual reflection and quiet harmony." He winked at me. "I believe that's what the good book calls truth in advertising," he chuckled. Then came the moment of truth. We navigated to Alicia's listing for my house, charming vintage getaway. Seeing my own bedroom, my own living room, displayed like so much merchandise still sent a hot spike of anger through me. But I pushed it down, focusing on the task at hand. The calendar, as I had seen before, was wide open. Alicia and Marcus, in their greed, had made every weekend for the next 3 months available, clearly expecting a flood of high-paying guests. "Let's start with this coming weekend," I said, my voice steady. "And the one after that. And the one after that." One by one, using the anonymous profile and the untraceable prepaid card, we booked every single Friday to Sunday slot for the next 3 months. The total cost was minimal. Alicia had set a low introductory price to attract initial bookings, and we only paid the initial deposit required by the platform. For each booking, when prompted for the reason for visit, Michael and I would take turns typing in variations on a theme: quiet spiritual retreat, meditation and harmony workshop, a weekend of prayerful song. With each click of the confirm booking button, I felt a small piece of my stolen dignity being returned to me. I was no longer a passive victim, a ghost in my own home. I was an active agent, a clever strategist, using their own tools, their own platform, their own greed against them. We knew Alicia would receive an email notification for each booking. I could almost picture her face, her smug satisfaction as her phone buzzed again and again, each notification a confirmation of her brilliant business acumen. She and Marcus would be celebrating, counting the money they thought they were about to make, planning what new luxury they would buy with the proceeds from selling out my life, my privacy, my peace of mind. They would have no idea that the New Hope traveler, who had just booked their entire season, was in fact the quiet elderly woman they so casually dismissed, the woman whose house they were so ruthlessly exploiting. After we had completed the last booking, Michael leaned back in his chair, a look of profound satisfaction on his face. "The trap is set, Flo," he said softly. "All we have to do now is wait for them to walk into it." The wait was not long. The very next day, Alicia called me, her voice giddy with a false, saccharine excitement. "Mama, you are not going to believe the news. Our little Airbnb venture. It's a massive success. We're completely sold out. Every weekend for the next 3 months. Isn't that just wonderful? People are just dying to stay in your charming little house." "Is that so, dear?" I replied, my voice a carefully constructed blend of surprise and grandmotherly pride. "Well, isn't that lovely for you?" "It's incredible," she gushed. "Our first guests arrive this Friday evening. A group called the New Hope Travelers. They sound so sweet and quiet. Dear Mama, this is just the beginning. We're going to make a fortune." "A fortune?" "Yes," I thought as I hung up the phone, a cold, hard smile on my face. A fortune was about to be made, but not the kind she was expecting. A fortune of lessons learned, of respect demanded, of a mother's truth delivered in glorious, roof-raising 3-part harmony. The countdown to Friday had begun. And for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to the weekend. Friday arrived with a palpable sense of anticipation. The air in my small bungalow felt different, charged with the energy of a secret about to be spectacularly revealed. I had spent the morning baking, not out of nervous energy but out of genuine joy. I made 2 of my famous pound cakes and a large batch of sweet iced tea. My choir, after all, would be arriving soon, and they would need refreshments after their journey. Alicia had called me that morning, her voice a little strained. "Now, Mama," she'd said in a tone one might use with a slightly unpredictable child, "our guests will be arriving around 7. Marcus and I will be there to greet them, of course. We'd appreciate it if you'd just stay in your room, perhaps. We want to make sure their check-in experience is seamless and professional." "Of course, dear," I'd replied meekly. I wouldn't want to be in the way. By 6:30 I was settled in my armchair by the living room window, a book open on my lap, though my eyes were fixed on the street outside. The stage was set. Alicia and Marcus pulled up in their shiny SUV, dressed in what they clearly considered their professional host attire. They went inside, likely doing a final, critical sweep, fluffing pillows, straightening pictures, preparing to welcome their quiet, high-paying guests. At precisely 7 o'clock, the reckoning arrived. It began not with a sleek sedan or a quiet taxi, but with a large, slightly rumbling church van pulling up to the curb, followed by a procession of half a dozen cars. Alicia and Marcus, who had been waiting expectantly on the porch, exchanged a look of pure confusion. Then the doors opened, and the New Hope Gospel Choir, all 30 members, began to emerge. There was Sister Beatrice with her booming laugh, young David with his keyboard case, Deacon Miller with his guitar, and bringing up the rear, resplendent in his Sunday best, was Reverend Michael Knight himself. They were not quiet. They were laughing, chatting, a joyful, boisterous river of humanity flowing up my garden path. I watched from the window as Alicia's face went from confused to utterly, comically horrified. Her perfectly composed hostess smile froze, then collapsed. Marcus just stood there, his mouth slightly agape, looking like a man who had just seen a ghost, or rather 30 of them. Reverend Knight strode confidently up to the porch, his hand outstretched. "You must be Alicia," he boomed, his voice echoing down the quiet street. "We're the New Hope travelers. Booked for our spiritual retreat. What a charming little place you have here. The acoustics are going to be magnificent." The choir?" Alicia stammered, looking at the large group of people now milling about on her mother's lawn. "But the booking, it said a quiet group." "Oh, we are quiet when we pray, my dear," the Reverend said with a beatific smile. "But when we sing praises to the Lord, the spirit tends to get a little loud. I trust that won't be a problem." The chaos that ensued was a joy to behold. Alicia and Marcus were trapped. They couldn't refuse entry. The booking was valid, confirmed, paid for. To cause a scene and kick out a beloved local pastor and his entire church choir would be a social and public relations disaster. So, with faces like thunder, they were forced to stand by as 30 people filed into my small bungalow, their cheerful greetings and laughter filling the rooms. I emerged from my bedroom then, feigning surprise. "Oh my!" I exclaimed. "Reverend Knight, Sister Beatrice, what a wonderful surprise. What are you all doing here?" The Reverend swept me into a hug. "Flo, my dear, your daughter and her husband have so generously offered your lovely home for our choir's weekend retreat. Isn't that just Christian charity at its finest?" He gave me a huge conspiratorial wink over Alicia's shoulder. Alicia's face was a mottled shade of red and white. She tried to protest, to explain, but how could she? How could she admit to this respected man of God, to her mother, to her own neighbors who were now peering curiously from their windows, that she had been secretly, illegally renting out her own mother's house behind her back and had just been outsmarted? The next 48 hours were a symphony of glorious, righteous, roof-raising chaos. The New Hope Gospel Choir took their spiritual retreat very seriously. They practiced for hours. My little house, designed for quiet contemplation, now vibrated with the powerful harmonies of "Oh, Happy Day" and "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot." They filled my kitchen, complimenting my pound cake, their joyful presence a stark contrast to the sterile, unwelcome silence I had grown used to. Alicia and Marcus were forced to retreat to their car for hushed, furious arguments, their seamless check-in experience having turned into a full-blown nightmare. The next weekend it happened again. And the weekend after that. Each Friday, Alicia and Marcus would receive a polite, automated message from their guest, the New Hope traveler. "Looking forward to another weekend of quiet harmony and reflection. Thank you for your continued hospitality." Their faces, when I'd catch a glimpse of them, were masks of pure, impotent fury. Their brilliant side hustle had become their weekend torment, their profit margin reduced to zero, their home filled with the one thing they couldn't stand, a joyful, tight-knit community that revered their sweet, elderly mother. The lesson had begun, delivered in glorious, three-part harmony. After the third consecutive weekend of my home being filled with the joyful, wall-shaking sounds of the New Hope Gospel Choir, my daughter Alicia and her husband Marcus finally surrendered. Their lucrative secret side hustle had been so thoroughly, so gloriously sabotaged that they had no choice. I received a terse, angry text from Alicia on a Sunday evening. "The Airbnb listing has been taken down. We need to talk." I let her wait a full day before I agreed to see them. I wanted them to stew in the juices of their own failed scheme. When they finally came over, their faces were a mixture of sullen anger and weary defeat. There were no important friends with them now, no pretense of their sophisticated lifestyle. Just the two of them, looking like scolded children who had been caught with their hands in the cookie jar. They sat stiffly on my living room sofa, the same sofa where just a month ago strangers had likely been sitting, paying them for the privilege. "All right, Mama," Alicia began, dropping all pretense of her usual saccharine sweetness. "We get it. You're clever. You made your point. You ruined our business plan." "Your business plan?" I repeated, my voice calm, my hands steady as I poured myself a cup of tea. Was that what you called it? I would have used a different term. Perhaps deceit? Exploitation? A profound and cruel disrespect for your own mother? Marcus, who rarely spoke unless it was to agree with Alicia, finally found his voice. Now, Flo, let's not be dramatic, he began. It was just a way to make a little extra cash. The house was sitting empty half the time anyway when you were at church or with your friends. The house was not sitting empty. I cut him off, my voice like ice. I was living in it. It is my home. My sanctuary. Not your personal hotel to be rented out to strangers behind my back. You violated my home, my privacy, and my trust. You treated me like an irrelevant old piece of furniture, a quaint feature to be mentioned in a listing. And you did it all for greed. They had the decency to look ashamed then, or at least to look at the floor. So, I continued, setting down my teacup with a deliberate click. Here is what is going to happen. First, I want my spare key back. Now. Alicia fumbled in her purse and sullenly placed the key on the coffee table. Second, I went on, the locks are being changed tomorrow morning. From now on, you will visit me in my home by invitation only like any other guest. You will not just pop in. You will not assume access. You will treat this house and me with the respect we deserve. Is that clear? They both nodded, their expressions grim. And third, I said, leaning forward slightly, you will both come to the New Hope Baptist Church next Sunday. And you will sit in the front row. And you will listen as Reverend Knight delivers a sermon on the commandment to honor thy father and thy mother. And after the service, you will apologize not just to me but to the Reverend for the disruption your greed caused his choir. And then you will apologize to Mrs. Gable for lying to her about the friends who were staying here. Alicia's head snapped up. Apologize? To the whole church? To the neighbors? That's humiliating. Yes, I said, a small cold smile touching my lips. It is. Almost as humiliating as being made to feel like a ghost in your own home, or discovering your life is being sold online for $75 a night. Consider it a lesson in empathy. Your final lesson in this particular course of study. They left soon after, their shoulders slumped, the weight of their public and private defeat heavy upon them. They did come to church that next Sunday. They did listen to Reverend Knight's powerful sermon. And they did, through gritted teeth, offer their shame-faced apologies. It wasn't a miraculous transformation of character, I knew that. It was the forced contrition of people who had been thoroughly outmaneuvered. But it was a start. My relationship with my daughter and son-in-law is different now. It is more distant, more formal, but it is, for the first time in a long time, honest. The false sweetness is gone, replaced by a wary respect. They no longer see me as a sweet elderly woman to be managed, but as their mother, a woman with a sharp mind and a will of steel. Last weekend, my garden, now free from the threat of strange cars and weekend renters, was filled with music once more. But this time it was by invitation. The entire New Hope Gospel Choir was there, not for a secret rehearsal but for a "Thank You, Flo" barbecue. Reverend Knight was at the grill, Otis from the tenor section was telling jokes, and Sister Beatrice was leading everyone in a joyful impromptu hymn. I sat on my porch swing, a plate of food in my lap, surrounded by the warmth and laughter of my true community. The air was filled with the scent of charcoal, freshly cut grass, and my prize-winning roses. It was the sound of a home reclaimed, of dignity restored, of a quiet, clever victory won. My house was no longer a charming vintage getaway. It was my home. And my truth, delivered in glorious roof-raising harmony, had set me free.